All right, welcome back. This episode is all about the dry and cure process of cannabis. We're here with David Sandelman from the company Cannatrol in Vermont. If you're unfamiliar with Cannatrol, they're a company who makes technology to simplify and perfect the dry and cure process. The at-home unit that I have is called the Cool Cure unit, which is about the size of a small mini fridge and has honestly changed my life as far as making my home grow smokable and long-lasting. David and I spoke on a panel together at MJ Biz last year, and slides from that presentation will be kind of thrown throughout the YouTube video for some additional visuals. We're going to start this episode with talking about Colorado versus California weed. And this is kind of some practical knowledge for anybody who's smoked weed in California as well as Colorado. Colorado weed is known for being really dry and crusty, and California weed is known for being sweet and smokable and smooth. And the dry and cure process and the environment in which that is happening has everything to do with that. I also wanted to note that one reason why the dry and cure process is so important is because properly dried and cured flower is less harsh, smokes smoother, and has more medicinal value for those reasons. In our first phase of Science of Smokability, we found that people reported smoking really dry flower at 0.45 water activity, that it was significantly more harsh and irritating compared to flower that was dried to a water activity of 0.65. Also, shout out to the winners of last week's seed giveaway, and this week's giveaway will be the largest one yet, followed by a final giveaway in the next week's episode. Make sure to stay tuned during this episode so you know how to enter. Have you popped seeds yet this year for the 2025 grow season? I have popped only 2 seeds, and I'm going to pop more tonight. If so, let me know what varieties you're growing. Also, just remember to take the literal 5 seconds it takes to drop a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, unless, of course, you hate women, weed, or science, but don't make me guess which one. So grab a sip of water, boop your dog on the nose, roll up a fat J, and just chill with David and I for the next hour or so. I've never been to Colorado. I need to go. Why are there not more weed conferences in Colorado?
I don't know, but the
Right?
weed there is terrible. They call it.
I've heard that.
It's
Is it because
called
of the elevation?
it's called Colorado Crunch, and look at what the dew point is in Colorado. Someone joked the other day and said they don't even have a dew point. The air, because of the elevation, is extremely dry. It's a very low dew point, so their flower is always over-dried, harsh, and anytime someone has a box in Colorado, they're like, "This is amazing! All my friends
changed
want to
my
bring their
life."
weed over." Yeah.
Oh,
So,
perfect environment for you guys. That's awesome.
yeah. It's funny because you talk about environment, cheese, Emilia Romano, cheddar, and then we were talking to someone the other day, and they were reflecting on Northern California, and some of the best flower comes out of Northern California, and I pulled out a dew point chart. Guess what? The average dew point typically there is exactly where you want it for drying and curing cannabis.
Welcome back to the Bioactive Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Riley Kirk, and today I have a very special local guest in New England, and this is David Sandelman from Cannatrol, who is the inventor, the CTO, and the COO, and I've had the opportunity to speak with David on a panel about the dry and cure process of cannabis, and he also has a lot of information about drying and curing other things too. I think there's a lot of mystery about the dry and cure process that David's going to help us understand better and understand how to really lock in that dry and cure process to make it reproducible and a high quality product every single time. So welcome to the show, David. And if you wouldn't mind just giving a little more background on why you became so involved in the dry and cure process of cannabis and potentially other things too.
Well, thanks for having me on, Riley. And it all is by accident. Living in Vermont, my background's in controls. We were doing, I was involved in a restaurant. We were doing farm to table, and we were learning from local cheesemakers. They were struggling with the aging of their cheese. And so doing a little bit of digging, What's the history of cheese? Cheese was made at a particular location, geographically, climate conditions. And so for hundreds of years, you'd make cheddar in Cheddar, England, and you make Romano in Emilia Romano, Italy, and they wouldn't try and swap it. And now people want to make any kind of cheese anywhere in the world, any time of the year. So it was an environmental issue, which is what they were struggling with. And they were trying to, dig caves here in Vermont, which is a little difficult to do when it's all granite. So
Yeah.
the solution came, build a room, a sealed room that emulates what a cave in that region is. What are the conditions in that cave? And the caves hold constant temperature. Just that's physics. Dig down, and you are at some level at some constant temperature. And the further you dig, the warmer it's going to get as you enter the core of the earth, which is still molten rock. So it gets quite hot down there. But where we typically dig caves, it's around 55 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's
That's a fondue cave if you're going too far down, right? You have just
yeah,
melted cheese.
that's right. Yeah, bring your skewers.
Yeah.
You bring a piece of bread and some chocolate and whatever else you want to dip in the cheese there. So it came down to holding these stable conditions. And so we're able to emulate it. And the stable conditions you want is temperature and the amount of moisture in the air. And those make up relative humidity. So when people say, oh, I want a relative humidity of X, that's a function of two variables, the temperature and the absolute amount of water vapor in that air, which you measure as either vapor pressure or dew point. And those two numbers go into equation and give you the relative humidity. So relative humidity is a result. It's not a controllable variable in itself. I like to use the example, if you have a loan payment and you want to change the loan payment, there's no knob or dial you turn up or down to change your loan payment. You'd have to change the principal, change the term, or change the interest. Change any one of those three variables and your monthly payment will change. But there's nothing to change your monthly payment directly. Relative humidity is the same thing. It's made up of the temperature and it is made up of the absolute amount of water in that volume of air. So what we're doing is we are controlling the temperature and the amount of water as two independent variables. In the end, the result is some relative humidity, but it's no longer important because by holding the amount of water vapor or vapor pressure in that space, if you bring a wet object in, like freshly harvested flour, it's got a high water activity. It's got a high vapor pressure. It's going to release that water vapor. It's going to want to come to equilibrium with the space.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you're at equilibrium, you're done. You can hold it there. It's not going to over dry. Versus the methods that are done today are putting the flour into a room with repurposed comfort cooling equipment, be it air conditioners or dehumidifiers. And when you buy them, they are rated at a dehumidifier pints per day. So if you buy a whoever brand 225, it's rated at 225 pints a day. It's going to remove of water. And it's going to keep doing that. And a pint weighs a pound. So that's 225 pounds of weight it's removing from your flour every day. And that's a good thing when you're trying to get rid of the free available water in there, which is what the mold and microbes grow on.
Gotcha. So it's good in the beginning, but it's very easy to over dry your flour if you're just using that metric.
Exactly. And that's why
Mm-hmm.
people have to watch their flour in their dry rooms and they need to remove it and put it in sealed vessels, turkey bags, mason jars, totes, you name it. But what they're doing is they're arresting the drying process and getting the flour away from equipment. Just that sole purpose is to just keep removing water. And that's what it'll keep doing and turn your flour to dust. So you remove it and you put it in these sealed containers. But unless you use some science to know when to pull that flour and arrest the drying process in the dry room, you might guess wrong. And it's still a little too wet, which means it has too much free available water in it. And now you seal it in a container. And well, with that free available water, if there were any microbes brought in, they're going to flourish. They're going to
And there's
grow.
gonna be microbes every single time. Like there's microbes on everything.
It's
So
everywhere.
yeah,
Yeah,
you will grow
you
microbes.
will grow them. So that's when people would say, I need to open this jar up, this toad up. And what they were doing is letting out free available water, if there was free available water still in the flower, that went into the atmosphere in that jar. And they were then equalizing the environment in the jar to what's outside the jar. And hopefully it was a little drier or the right amount of moisture outside the jar. But if you open that jar in Florida in August, guess what? There's probably more water vapor in the air outside the jar than was inside the jar. And now you're bringing water in
And more microbes in
and
because
more
they're also
microbes in.
in the air. Yeah.
Exactly. And what you wanted to do was let it out if, and it was a guess, there was still free available water in that flower and you needed to further dry it. Or on the other side, if you're in Minnesota in January, where the dew point is 10 below zero, some crazy low, there's like no moisture in the air, you open that jar. If that flower is already dry to the right point, you're now going to make the air dry in the jar. You're going to seal it. And now the flower is going to continue to give off more water vapor, more moisture into that dry air because it wants to come to equilibrium. That's what pressure, Boyle's law, all these interesting physics is about, is things coming to equilibrium. And so you vapor pressure in the jar of the flower, and you measure the vapor pressure of the flower with water activity. Okay, so water is a 1. And we know that when you get to a zero 0.6 water activity, and 0.6 is not unique to cannabis flower, it's true for everything. People who do pharmaceuticals, people who do food, people who store rare documents, they want to get their water activity to the threshold's 0.65, but that and below. So we like using 0.6. Microbes can't grow.
Right. So it's universal because you're trying to prevent the microbes to grow. So it wouldn't be specific to, cheese or to cannabis or to documents because the same microbes are going to be the problem either way. And if we can drop that water activity below and not allow the microbes to grow, that's going to be consistent against all these different industries that we're talking about.
Right. Microbes are not cannabis flower specific.
Right.
They're universal. They'll flourish anywhere. It works great after a flood on your sheetrock and your carpet, right? They flourish because there's a lot of water, free available water for them to feed on and grow. But once you get to a 0.6 water activity, you no longer have the unbound water that the microbes grow on, which free available water.
Wait, can we talk about that just for one more second?
Yeah.
Because not all water is bad. We need some water present in that final product. If we think about smokability, if we think about rollability, I think all of us have tried to, roll a joint with super, super dry cannabis. And it's like, I compare it to wet sand versus dry sand. It feels like dry sand trying to make a sandcastle. It's impossible, right? But if you have that more wet sand, it's really easy to make a sandcastle. And same thing with cannabis. If you have more bound water present in that flower, it's going to be much more malleable. It's going to be way easier to roll, and it's likely going to be a lot less harsh to smoke as well. So some of the water is bound, meaning it's integrated into that flower. You can't remove it. It's now part of that flower. And then the unbound water is what we're trying to get rid of because that's what would be available to all those microbes. If they were trying to survive and thrive, they would need that unbound water, which would be available for them to utilize. Is that correct?
Precisely. Exactly.
Okay, cool.
And you don't want to take one molecule of bound water out if you're in the business of selling a product by weight. Because now you're removing bound water, which is weight on the scale. So that's where you save on yield. That's where we see facilities are over drying because they're not using the science of water activity to know when their free available water is gone by shooting for a 0.6 water activity. So they over dry. And they could be losing we've seen facilities as high as 10% of their top line revenue is lost due to overdrying. Yet they put all that money into growing amazing plants. And here, post harvest, they lose all this money by overdrying. And as you said, the drier it is, the harsher the smoke is. When it's nice and moist, the smoke is smooth, flavorful, it tastes great. People love properly dried and cured. The post harvest is so important to the flower.
It's so important. I also want to put a little asterisk note in this episode that when I did visit the Cannatrol facility, they're like, they have flower there that they're constantly experimenting with. Like, they're cannabis consumers. They're not just people that are, curious about cannabis. They are very involved in this industry. They're part of who we are. So they care about, David cares about smokable flower. He wants to smoke good flower too, and so does the whole team at Cannatrol. So I think that's important to say, just so consumers know that you're not just talking numbers. We can actually feel these differences too, and you're part of this industry and more than just selling devices.
So it's interesting. Yes, we want to educate the industry on the science of post harvest, and also, when we did proof of concept, because we had developed the technology and it's been sold all over for cheese and meat, and it was like, will this work for a cannabis flower? And we did proof of concept and built a prototype. That's when the first person who tried it said, this is some of the best flower I've ever grown. This stuff is amazing. And then as we put more of those prototypes out there, more and more people kept giving us the same feedback. I don't know what this thing is doing, but this is incredible. It smokes fantastic. So that's when we said, well, now we need to figure out why. Mm-hmm. And the things we started coming up with is that we had about 16% higher terpenes when compared to conventional dry cure using air conditioners and dehumidifiers. We're saying, so now we understand why the experience is better, why there's more flavor and taste, because we're retaining more terpenes.
16% is insanely higher. Why do we think that is? Why do we think we're retaining more terpenes with this method compared to other traditional methods?
Well, that became the next question. Okay, what's happening here? So we started getting into what's called kinetics and looking at the trichomes. Because at the end of the day, the reason we grow the plant is to harvest the trichomes. That's it. We want to harvest those amazing trichomes that are happening on the flower. And so we started taking a close look at the trichomes because that's the factory. That's where the terpenes are manufactured. That's where the THCs are manufactured. It's in the head of the trichome. And so that's where we started researching it. And we started learning, and we worked with the CRC, Cannabis Research Coalition, to do this work independently and dig into it. And they saw that conventional dry cured flower, 25 as high as 30% of the trichome heads were damaged. We're using our method, only 1 to 2% of the trichome heads were damaged. So now we found the smoking gun. Why we have higher terpenes is because we have better trichome preservation. So now...
And is that because it's just a gentler process? It's more consistent? Why are those trichome heads remaining more intact versus other methods?
So that's where we're digging now. We know that conventional systems using repurposed HVAC equipment is causing swings in the vapor pressure in the space. And so what we're thinking is that fluctuation in vapor pressure is causing the trichome heads to expand and contract, where we're maintaining a constant vapor pressure and the trichome heads don't budge. They just sit there and rest. Now, one of two things or both are happening. By allowing the head to be stable, we're allowing the cuticle, which is only 2-cell thick wall holding all the goodies inside.
You can imagine that's pretty sensitive to fluctuations.
Yep. Either that is hardening to give us better stability, which is
Mm-hmm.
also leading to good shelf stability,
Mm-hmm.
or it's fluctuating and it is cracking, or a
Mm.
combination of both. That's what we're now trying to understand. Which is it, one, the other, or a little bit of each? But we
Oh,
know
very
that's where
cool.
it's happening.
Yeah, and Dr. Justice and the team at the CRC does amazing work. And I've seen some of the microscopic images from Dr. Justice showing some of these damaged trichomes with the traditional dry and cure. And it is significant. You can see it. You can see that some are like deflated, some are cracked. There's just a lot more variation compared to the microscopic images from flower that's been dried in a Cannatrol, where it's much more just like glossy, consistent trichomes. So that'll be really cool to see that data continue to
Yeah.
come
And
out.
we're continuing to work with Dr. Justice. And what was interesting is she wasn't convinced the first time. The first time through, she was looking at the trichomes under a microscope and saw the difference in populations of damaged and non-damaged, and did a grid count with a
Mm.
microscope, counting one trichome head at a time in the grid, and came up with this, somewhere between 20 and 30% of them were ruptured or damaged compared to the 1 to 2%. Uh, Not being satisfied with that method, then applied chromophotography. And it turns out that damaged trichomes show up with a red shift in the color spectrum, and then allowed a computer to take from a microscope chromophotography, see where the color spectrum went. And sure enough, the color spectrum shift matched what the individual counting of damaged trichomes did on a grid. So it was approached both top down, bottom up, left, right, whichever you want to call it, but it was approached two completely different ways and came up with almost the same results.
Ah, love when data matches up. There's no better feeling.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I want something that you have said a couple times that honestly blew my mind was looking back at the traditional 60-60 method of, drying and curing your cannabis, 60 degrees, 60% relative humidity. Why was this originally developed by the cannabis industry? Why did we originally start using that method and it was kind of adapted as the standard method for dry and cure?
So the 60% relative humidity, if you go through a lot of various equations, it turns out it comes back to a zero point 0.6 water activity when you go through all the conversions and everything. But where'd the 60 degrees come from? Well, people brought it into a room with an air conditioner and they needed the compressor to run. And if the thermostat was set to 68 degrees and it was 68 degrees in the room, chances are the thermostat occasionally cycled. And the room was not responding to the vapor pressure, the water coming off of the flower. So they turned down the thermostat. And guess what? Most, if not all, cool thermostats bottom out at 60 degrees. So
So it was just the lowest you could go
it's the
on a
lowest you can
traditional
set your thermostat, and
thermostat.
that's where 60 came from. Now, what's interesting is it's sort of counter to the psychrometric physics and stuff. The colder, the cooler the air is, the more work it is to get that water out of it. So just look at a dehumidifier. Let's say that's a 225. That's rated at 225 pints per day at 78 degrees. As you lower the temperature that's coming into that dehumidifier, the amount of water it can remove goes down. So if you put a dehumidifier in a room at 60 degrees, a dehumidifier rated at 225 is going to be somewhere in the mid 100s, like 125, 150 will be its new capacity, because the capacity is greatly reduced as you lower those temperatures. So that's working against you, those low temperatures. The equipment has to work harder. It's more difficult to get that water out of the flower. So we
Mm.
settled on 68 degrees. Um, it's high enough to help with the removal of moisture, but not too high where we're now impacting the vapor points of the terpenes, which start boiling off in the high 70s, a lot of them.
So you want to stay below those high 70s, if anything, because you don't want to lose more terpenes. If you're already maintaining more, especially with your technology, you don't want to
Exactly.
increase that.
And
Yeah.
people do know this who have tried to dry their flower in dehydrators.
Ooh, I've never even thought about that, but yeah, that would be a mistake you probably only make once.
That's right. It's pretty disgusting what comes out of that.
What about freeze dryers? Have we talked about that at all? Is that
So freeze dryer is like a whole other method that goes on. You don't, the flower is almost, it looks good, but it almost turns to dust when you squeeze it. It just goes poof and it's gone. And it tends to be a very harsh smoke. But there are applications for it for doing, certain extractions, and you're
mm-hmm.
not too care, don't care too much about the flower integrity, and you're just after the raw terpenes, it has its applications. But if you're talking about smokable flower, flower, it's going to be used for pre-rolls or just flower that's sold, yeah, you want to preserve that water content in there that gives you a nice, smooth, flavorful smoke.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I actually think the aroma is okay with freeze-dried cannabis. I will not smoke it though, but vaping it is not a horrible experience. It actually still does have some of that flavor present, but rollability and smokability is like way down with freeze-dried
Right. And
cannabis.
what's interesting is we've not taken the deep dive, but we do have people who have dried and cured flower with our equipment and then go ahead and do hash and other
Mm.
extractions. And they say there is a noticeable difference as a better product. We're not
Well, you
exactly
would
sure
think, yeah,
why.
if the trichome heads are, really or the trichomes in general are what's being used for hash, if you're getting better cuticles and more terpene retention, you would think that would correlate to higher quality hash in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense.
That's really cool. A question that I have would be, how does the rate of drying affect the final product? Like if you need to get to that zero point 0.6 water activity, could you drop it immediately, or does it matter how long it takes to get to that final level?
Um, what we understand is if you dry too fast,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to get a harsh smoke.
Okay.
And typically we get to a zero point 0.6 water activity in about 4 days. And then what we do is we recommend leaving the flower at least 4 more days. So that way you start getting some cure on it. And
Okay.
as you know, there's a whole range of other things going on. So step one is get rid of the bound water, not too quickly, over a
Right,
couple
but
of
quick
days.
enough so that it's safe from any of those potential contaminants growing.
Exactly. You don't want to do it too long because then you're spending more time in that zone where the microbes can grow because your water activity is too high. So, but you don't want to do it too fast. So we find that with our typical settings of a 68-degree dry bulb and a 54, 55 degree, 56 degree, somewhere in that range, dew point, you get water activity of zero point 0.6 in about 4 days. Also, it depends on whether you're drying just flower on stems, flower stems, branches, because then you're bringing in all this extra biomass that you're taking water out of. That's just work that's not doing much for you. Turns out how you dry cure has more to do with the handling and ease, particularly in large commercial facilities, whether they want to get down and buck to just individual flowers and dry them on trays, which gives you the faster dry time. It takes up the least amount of square feet for drying flower, but very often that doesn't work in a facility's operational procedures. So
Because
others
they're
will
just chopping down like the whole plant. They want to just put it in there. They don't have time to immediately go ahead and trim every single little bud off.
exactly where some facilities are set up to do that. But other facilities want to take the whole plant down. Some will chop it down to smaller branches. The less biomass you have, the easier it is for the system to dry it because you're not removing all this other unbound water from twigs and branches that really serve no purpose. Also, it helps in the equipment sizing because we size our equipment for the total wet weight coming in. So, you know, in the cost of the equipment, there could be some savings by removing some of the biomass coming in so we don't have to work on removing that water in the space.
All right. This week's seed giveaway is from various different seed companies. So I want to thank Seed Nest, Trichome Jungle Seeds, Swamp Ash Seeds, and Plant Magic Homestead for the donated seeds. For this week's episode, in order to enter, you can comment something that rhymes with seed. And you can enter by commenting this on the Instagram post of this week's episode with David or on Patreon. But remember, you do not need to be a paying member of Patreon. I just need a way to contact you. So thanks for everybody for entering this. It's been really fun so far, and I'm excited to do one more giveaway next week. And happy growing. Yeah, I mean, I don't even have a facility. I'm just a home grower, but I still, I was literally running off to a conference and I had to harvest a plant right before I left. And I just cut it up as best as I could and put it in my Cannatrol. And then I came back and it was already done the dry process and it started the cure process. And I think that plant would have probably been ruined if I didn't have a Cannatrol to just kind of put it in before I left, because I think it would have I think it was actually freezing. We were getting a frost that weekend, so I was freaking out because I had to leave, but I also had to harvest my plants, and that was a lifesaver. That's when I was first wow, this machine is a game changer.
And you just raised a really important point, because if you used other methods or left it outside, you had no control of how much water was going to leave that flower. When you're putting the flower into one of our systems where we're controlling the vapor pressure, the flower comes to equilibrium and stops drying. It holds at the 0.6. Now it can stay there. You're no longer moving flower, handling flower. So everyone, that's using conventional equipment, they got to arrest that drying process, take the flower out, put it in the turkey bags, the totes, the jars, whatever. And that handling leads to further damage to the trichome heads. They're really fragile. They're only in that 2-cell wall thick cuticle.
Right. So the less you touch it, the better.
Right. And now you can just leave it in that same space indefinitely. Eventually you got to move it out. You got more crop to bring in, but you're no longer under time constraints. You save all kinds of labor.
Do we know, because we kind of hinted at that there's a lot happening during the dry and cure process. We're not just losing water and then period, that's all that's happening, right? There's a lot going on. We are having gas release. We're having enzymatic conversions of certain molecules, making it more sweeter and more smooth of a smoke. Do we have any evidence that if it were to be a more gentle, slower process and maintaining a certain temperature, that those enzymes might be able to work longer and provide a different type of experience or a different type of cure compared to traditional methods?
That's awesome that you bring this up. So what we're doing is now finally there's a tool where you can have consistency, repeatability, so you can actually run experiments. Where before, if you just put it into a room using conventional methods, where you had too many variabilities in the environment and what was going on, and when the flower was removed from the drying room and then put into the cure jars or whatever. Now you just leave it. It comes to equilibrium and it's stable. So now you have a tool where you have repeatability and you can shift the vapor pressure up and down and try it at different levels to see what happens. Now, we do know anecdotally that different cultivars cure differently. So we grew a Jilly Bean and an Acapulco Gold, 2 plants side by side in the tent, harvest them very close to time, put them into a cool cure, and in 8 days, the Jilly Bean smoked amazing. The Acapulco Gold was harsh. It was just, being a bit of some weed snobs we were ready to just throw the Acapulco Gold. It was fun to try and grow, but obviously not so good to smoke. Well, we left it in for 30 days. And at the end of 30 days, the Acapulco Gold became the new favorite. So we learned that particular cultivar does better with a long cure than another cultivar. Anecdotal, but we now have commercial facilities who, when they built their facility, like a lot of places, set aside a corner somewhere, which is going to be dry cure. Their focus was uh, flower rooms, veg rooms, lights, irrigate, how to grow the most amazing plants. And the post harvest was, a little corner in the area, and it was sort of an afterthought. And we've retrofit those facilities and really improved their product. But now they come back and said, now that I know what I know, now I wish I had a lot more rooms so I can run different cultivars, different settings, different times, and really start to express what might be hidden inside that cultivar when you really can address post harvest. And hey, the wine industry has known this for centuries. You can take the same vineyard, give the grapes to 5 different winemakers, same plant. Now we're just talking different people handling post harvest differently, and you're going to get 5 different wines.
Oh, I love that you just shared that too, because I think a lot of cultivators are kind of emotionally attached to the dry and cure process because you get that better understanding of strain specificity. You get to understand that strain a little bit more. And, every strain shouldn't be treated the same way. And it's cool that you guys have some, I think anecdotal data is legitimate, but just being able to still use the Cannatrol, but still manipulate it in ways that are going to have strain specific, effects and have to be treated a little bit differently. So I think that's really interesting, especially with the Acapulco Gold. How did the flavor change from when you first tried it to when you last tried it? Was it sweeter? Was it just smoother?
Okay, so the best way I can describe it is a young wine versus a more mature wine. If you've had a young
Mm,
wine, it's harsh, it has edges to it. It's
yes.
not yet developed. And then if you have a more mature wine, it's rounder, it's full body. That's the best way I can describe the difference that happened to the Acapulco Gold.
Full bodied is a great description.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
more
love that.
round. It didn't have those harsh edges to it.
Now, this is a question from me, but I also had a question similar to this on Patreon. And that's if you had let's say someone has a Cool Care, which is like a personal use Cannatrol machine, and maybe they have their home grow in it, but maybe they also purchased some dispensary cannabis that was dry as a bone and horrible to smoke. Could you put that into your Cannatrol, rehydrate it, and potentially make it a better experience?
Absolutely. It's done all the time. What you can't do is put back the terpenes that have been lost, the trichomes that are damaged, but the texture of the flower could be improved and the smoking of the flower is improved. And what we're seeing is in commercial facilities that are using our equipment, there are facilities now that use this for pre-roll machines. People with
Hmm.
big automated pre-roll machines struggle with, particularly if they're bringing flower in from other growers. Some come in very dry, some come in wet. So they're using our equipment to dry everything to the same water activity so that it's all the same. And then the machine runs without getting hung up because it's too dry or too wet. What was an interesting outcome we heard from someone is that, a customer gave them 1,000 grams of flour to roll, and then they had over 1,000 joints to give them 1 gram joints. Why? Because they delivered it very dry, and by leaving it in their Cannatrol space for a day or so, it rehydrated it. Their purpose was for the machine to work more consistently, reliably, and better. But it turned out that they picked up some weight along the way.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, you come back with like 1,070 and they're like, what? Are you
Yeah,
bad at math?
yeah.
Or, yeah, that's really funny. I remember when we were talking on that panel at MJ Biz, Keith was talking about, he uses a large Cannatrol in his facility. And he was talking about how he sometimes manipulates the different final water activities based on what he's producing. Like, for instance, if he's producing a pre-roll, sometimes he has to drop it a little bit lower so it's not as sticky and you're actually able to compact those cones or however that machine's working, whatever one you have. Can you touch on that a little bit of like how maybe you might need to adjust it depending on different rolls that you're trying to utilized?
Yeah, it depends on the machine, and the method. Are you packing cones or you're doing a roll like what is it, Roll Pro type of
Yeah,
thing?
Roll Pro.
So of the different methods of making how the machine makes a pre-roll is going to affect what the best water activity is. But what these facilities are finding is they know what to dial in their dew point, which will give them exact consistency. So they'll run their machine at a particular dew point. They'll see, is it working well? Am I getting hangups? What jams, whatever? And then let's raise it or let's lower it a little. And they find that happy magic number. And then they just run it there. So all their flour goes through a Cannatrol, and, whether it's hours or a day, but they condition it before it then goes over to the machine, where now they know they're going to have consistent results and that machine's not going to be down and hanging up and all the other issues with automated equipment.
Cool. Yeah. So I've only used the small version of it that actually looks just like a mini fridge. It's quite discreet. It's extremely easy to use. And all you need to do is occasionally wet a sponge on the inside, and that's going to provide some more water in that environment. I'm just curious because I've seen a really large build out, but I've never seen it in action. What is the little water tray like in a really big Cannatrol? Is it like just a really big sponge, or
No, that's such a great question. So the home unit, yeah, we use a sponge, but once we get into big commercial systems, we use steam humidifiers.
Oh, that makes way more sense.
And we use steam, not misters. Why? Steam is sterile. Okay,
it's heated. I
it's
gotcha.
you're vaporizing water and you're putting it into the room as a sterile versus the foggers, the misters, whatever's in that water is being jettisoned outside those little nozzles. And you've seen facilities, if they've got a lot of mineral content in their water and they use misters, you get a fine white powder on things. Yeah, you don't want that in
Yeah,
your,
absolutely not.
and then the other thing is the misters are creating little microscopic droplets. And
Mm.
so they still need to turn really to a good vapor, which takes energy from the room. Where when you use a steam humidifier, you're putting the energy in. So it's already steam vapor, water vapor that can easily be absorbed into the airspace in the room.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thanks for that breakdown. That helps my brain
Yeah,
conceptualize
not the
things.
giant sponges, no.
That's literally what I pictured. Okay, so I think that the Cool Cure is 100,000,000% worth the investment, but they can be a little pricey. So if somebody was not able to afford a Cool Cure, Cannatrol Cool Cure, but they still wanted a decent drying cure at home, is there any way to manipulate temperature and dew point to get something kind of decent quality from their home grow? Or do you have any recommendations for people if they're trying to work on that other than getting a Cool Cure?
It's really difficult. I mean, that's part of what our technology is. We came up with a method and have several patents on how to independently control what's called the sensible latent ratio, which is how much heating or cooling an air conditioner does compared to how much water removal it does. So the latent
Okay.
capacity is water removal. The sensible capacity is cooling of the air in an air conditioner. So an air conditioner has a latent sensible ratio, and we manipulate those two. So there really aren't too many ways that we found yet, other than the ones we've come up that we were able to patent to do that. Now, for those that can't afford it, a couple of things have gone on. We've got a lot of retailers that offer rental programs.
No way. That is so cool.
The interesting thing is a lot of people who they rent them, they wind up buying them.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm not sending this back. This
Well,
is
especially like I store all of my cannabis in my Cool Cure, and like it is the best smokable flower. I can't imagine going back to not having that. So
and then,
I can
then
see
we get
that.
groups. Four people get together, chip in and buy one, and they store their flower in there. And then when someone has a harvest, they'll use it for their harvest. And that's a question that comes up a lot. And that is, well, what do I do with all the flower in my cool cure when I have a harvest? And what you want to do is take it out and then put it in some sealed vessel. That's because it's at the right water activity, it's at the right moisture contents. You just want to seal it in a container. Sea vaults work great for that. Put your fresh harvest in, dry it, and after about a week, then take everything and put it back in the cool cure and continue to store it there. And we ship them and supply hemp paper bags. So that way you can put that harvest in the paper bag, write on it with a Sharpie, harvest date, cultivar, and then keep them in the cool cure. And now you have a library. It's like, what do we feel like smoking today?
It's really cool. So those hemp bags are permeable
Yes.
to moisture? Very cool.
Exactly. That's why we use them, because they're vapor permeable.
Oh, that's awesome. I know you guys had provided one of those bags, but I just put a little tape and wrote my strain on, like, I had each shelf have each strain. So that's what I did for this year. But I learned so much with my cool cure this year. Next year I'm going to plant my plants, like, I think a week apart, so that I can just, like, not even think about it. I can put one in, wait a week, put it in that sea vault, and then do the next one, and it should hopefully
stagger out,
all work out. Yep. Yeah.
And also
So
sometimes,
cool.
depending on local weather, a freshly cut plant, if the weather conditions are right, if it's dry out, and you're looking, dew points in the 50s and below, then you can hang the plant up for a day or so, and that'll give you a head start going into the cool cure.
Yeah, and I will also say, for people who live in states that maybe aren't fully accepting of this world of cannabis, it smells a lot less using the cool cure versus like a hang dry. And that likely is because you're losing less terpenes. That's definitely part of it, right? When you smell terpenes, that's because you're losing terpenes. So it smells a lot less, and you can lock it. And that's really big if you're a parent or if you live in a place that might not be safe. Those two things are things that I didn't even like really think about, but it is a nice safety blanket to have those two features.
You just raised a great point, and it's one of the calls we get, and that is, I just cured my flower, I dried it in my cool cure, and you destroyed it. And it's like, well, what do you mean? Well, it has no smell. Well, that's a good thing, because we locked in all the terpenes. So we say, okay, take one of the flowers, break it open, and smell it. And then all you hear is, oh my, that's amazing.
Yes.
Where people thought that, the more it smells, the better. No, the more you're smelling, that's the more terpene trichome heads that are ruptured and just poof, going off into space.
Exactly. If you smell it, that is terpenes in the air.
Right.
So.
Not what you're going to enjoy when it comes time to smoke it.
Exactly. Save the terps.
Yes.
I have a Patreon question for you that I think is a great question. And I think you've answered this in the past with me, but you mentioned in the beginning that you started with the cheese industry, and I think you mentioned cured meats as well.
Yep.
Can you put cheese and meats into a Cannatrol?
Nope. They live in very different conditions. Cheese likes something in the 90% relative humidity range.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Yeah, meats want it very dry and cold. So everyone has their own little microclimate they like to live in, which are not appropriate for the cannabis flower. And then the cool cure just isn't designed to go to those temperatures or moisture contents that those other products like.
Good answer. Yeah.
But things you can use with your cool cure, we store nice Chinese tea leaf in it. Keeps it in great condition. I know people, they keep their fresh herbs, their rosemary and oregano and stuff in their cool cure. Yep.
Yeah, I mentioned I grow tobacco, and when we were meeting up in Vermont, I was talking about potentially trying that in my cool cure, but I honestly don't have room for it in the cool cure right now because I grew a lot of tobacco. So I'm doing just like a traditional hang dry, and tobacco takes a really, really, really long time to cure. So I think in the future I might experiment with that, but for now, I think I'm just going to keep
Yeah,
cannabis in
we're
there.
we're talking to a couple of people. I don't know if you know that in Vermont there is a surge in growing saffron
Oh,
and
the most
harvesting it.
expensive spice in the
The
world.
most expensive spice in the world. So comes this harvest season, which is somewhere around October. We have a couple of people who are going to try uh, some saffron in a Cannatrol to see if it changes the outcome.
Oh, that is really interesting. And I think there's actually recently a paper that was looking at how the saffron leaves might also have some medicinal potential. So that could in the future be another cool thing to see if you could put the leaves in the cool cure and then, use that for extractions later on. And then obviously use the actual stigma, which is the part that's used as a spice. Also.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. Yeah, I think we're just going to learn more and more uses, and especially because you can manipulate the different metrics on your Cannatrol. I never have because I was like, this is how it's set up. This is how I'm going to trust it right now. But I think as you get more comfortable and as you said, like learning different strains and different genetics and trying to learn in that way. But, I think that's just a thing you learn over time. But I'm definitely going to start experimenting a little bit more
Yeah,
in the
that's
future.
bigger than us because we're not cultivators. We are supplying a technology, and we
Yeah.
encourage people to play with the technology, and but not too far. You know,
You guys should have like a forum on your website where people can talk about what they're doing on there.
we're working on it.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
Yeah.
So cool. Okay, I have another question from the Patreon community. This says, is crunchy on the outside flower cluster and spongy on the inside at 60 to 62 good to jar up?
Well, if it's crunchy on the outside and spongy on the inside, it didn't dry evenly. Chances are it dried too fast and the outside over dried before the inside was properly dried. So you have an inconsistent dry, which probably happened by exposing it too low a vapor pressure and causing the outside water moisture to come off. Um, Coming from charcuterie where we were, that's also, they call it case hardening. And if
Mm.
you dry a salami or some charcuterie and you dry it too fast, what happens is the outside case hardens and then the water inside can't get out and you wind up with
Oh.
a rancid salami.
Oh
So
God,
you don't,
rancid salami
yeah,
sounds
so you
so
don't want to dry
gross.
it too fast. And that description sounds like what's going on. It's like sort of a case hardening where you want that flour to be homogeneous all the way through its texture, its feel.
Oh, such a good point because that's something we also talked about when we were on the panel is just, you want your big nugs, your little nugs, the inside of the nug, the outside of the nug. You want it all to be homogenous. You want it all to be equal moisture levels so that when you grind it up and you smoke it or, just shelf stability that it's consistent and you don't have to guess if your huge nugs are, not ready yet and maybe your small ones are. If you have it in that consistent vapor pressure, it should all eventually equilibrate.
We call that sous vide for weed.
Sous vide for weed.
Because when anyone cooks with sous vide, what they're doing is they're taking the protein, a piece of meat or a piece of fish, vacuum sealing it in a bag, and putting it in a water bath at the finished temperature that they want to cook that protein to. And that protein comes to equilibrium. So now, if you've got a little steak and a big steak side by side, they're both going to cook to that bath temperature, let's say 127.5 degrees. They're both going to be done to that temperature, and you can leave them in there for hours. It's not going to overcook. We're the same way. You leave the flour in our conditioned space, it's not going to over dry. And the little ones and the big ones all come to the same consistency, the same doneness, versus when you cook two pieces of meat in an oven, the small piece is always going to cook faster than the big. You're always going to make a compromise if you're going to pull them out at the same time. Otherwise, you got to take them out at different times. And no one is going to be pulling out their little popcorn buds before their giant colas. It's all coming out together. So either their little popcorns are getting overdone and their big colas are right, or vice versa. But with us, sous vide for weed, it all comes to equilibrium and you just leave it there and you can't over dry it.
Oh, I love that. It's also very catchy. Sous vide for weed. I'm going to start saying that. Awesome. Well, we're getting towards the end of the hour, and I want to give you an opportunity to, one, say anything that we haven't talked about that you want people to know about the dry and cure process or the cool cure in general. And then we'll talk about, how to stay up to date with you and what you're doing and the team's doing and how to purchase a cool cure or a large different Cannatrol device if that's what people are after.
Yeah, it's all on our website, cannatrols.com. And the website is broken up into the home units, what we call our quick start systems, which are rooms we build, fully test it, knock it down, and then send it on a pallet. And then someone can stand it up in a day. And those range up to 720 wet pounds. With the small one starting at 160 wet pounds. And they're for small craft growers that don't have a lot of infrastructure, but have a space to stand up a room, and they're up and running in a day or so. And then we also have our custom systems where either we get involved in the design of a facility and become part of the plans, or we will go into a facility and retrofit the existing rooms. So that's all laid out on the website. Along with a lot of the technical papers and research that backs up everything we spoke about. A lot of the work for the CRC, that's all there. Other white papers from other industries are there. Lots of testimonials from facilities and pictures so everyone can see a whole range of pictures. And of course, we're on Instagram at Cannatrol and Facebook and all those good places you can find us. But even pick up the phone. We actually answer the phone here. If you call, someone picks up the phone and we'll talk weed about it to you.
Wow, that is actually so rare. It's nothing makes me want to crawl out of my skin more when you need help with something and you cannot reach a human. It's so frustrating. So that is awesome. And also your website has a lot of educational videos that are actually fun to watch. They're not horrible to watch. So if you got something out of this episode, but you want to learn a little more, I will put all of the information in the show notes of this episode. So it'll link right to the website so you can learn more. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk today, David. I always learn so much talking to you, and you're the number one expert in my head with dry and cure process and really streamlining it and making it so much more consistent for so many growers. So thank you so much, and hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you for having me. It's fun as always chatting with you.
Awesome. Well, mad love, everyone. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Bye-bye.